Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada, streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Float, Odyssey, Telegram, Twitch, and the Prepper Broadcast Network. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim, and today is October 25th, 2022, and this is episode 192 of the Workshop Podcast. So guys, if you tuned in yesterday, you know you got part one of an incredible look into the future with a discussion with Andy Higginbotham, a good member of the workshop community. We had a great conversation. It went close to 2.5 hours. Too long that I wanted to split it up into 2 episodes. So this is going to be part 2 of that incredible discussion. Real quick, we'll get the announcements out of the way, and then we'll hop right back into where Andy and I left off. 2 quick things. Patch of the Month Club. Guys, if you appreciate the content, if I've brought value to you in the content I've brought to you, if you've built anything great and you want to do a value for value exchange and you like patches, then why not subscribe to the Patch of the Month Club? It's the way you can support me by me giving you more value than what you're spending. So the idea is that every month, $10 a month, $100 a year, you get a cool patch in the mail. But hopefully that patch is worth $10 plus the benefits that are going to come along with it. Extra discounts and being on that secret, super secret, exclusive email list where you find out about discounts and new products before anybody else. So go to patchofthemonth.co and sign up. Number 2, if you are part of our community but haven't got over and joined the Telegram group, please do me a favor and do that. Even if you're not using Telegram, it's worth downloading the app. It's the best place to interact as a community, to sit, share our information, ask people questions, the whole works. So go by there, grab the link from the description below, and please come by and join us in Telegram. And finally, today's tool is the dewalt Power Stack battery for $74.99 on Amazon. I love that thing. It is a great combination with the ultra compact impact driver that dewalt makes. It's light, it's powerful, it exceeds all the other batteries of comparable size on the market. Pick one of those up and support the workshop today. And with that, guys, let's slide right in to part number 2 of the conversation I had with Andy. We go down a whole bunch of rabbit holes, but we end up with some predictions about the future. Yeah, so and it feels to me like the the onus of the companies has been focusing on the information side of things, with the Internet of Things, and then the what is it, the near field kind of stuff, and with the cloud and with all of that. And here I'm gonna say a word that some people hate, but 5G, for instance, the whole design. Sorry, guys. The whole design behind that was for like near field communications and kind of mesh networking and real quick kind of back and forth. Right. And again, we're just talking about amoral technology. It can be taken by the government and used for a surveillance state, or it can be taken by somebody who really, really cares about the earth and wants to use the least amount of chemicals as possible. Mm-hmm. So the technology itself, we'll use this. A gun sitting in your, is not going to shoot anybody, right? Good or evil. It's a tool. Right. But do you want to work through some of the comments to see how far we can get here for a bit? We Andy and I get carried away. We try to solve the world's problems, and I
think we've about got them knocked out. Another 15 minutes and we'd be done. But we can go to comments instead
if they'd listen to us. But you know what? We'll slide it off for another episode, and we'll let the world sort itself out. But let's start with Ted here. He said we should be going after liquid natural gas for vehicles. What do you think? Do you have natural gas in your area?
There's a little bit of commercial natural gas around here. I think the challenge with a lot of that stuff is figuring out, it's not that the vehicles can't run off of it, because vehicles can run easily off natural gas. It's the distribution and safety stuff. And so I don't know, and it's hard to predict because, again, this gets back to the physical. Like, if you want to run anything, electric vehicles or LNG or hydrogen or whatever, you need hundreds of billions of dollars spent by the government or private industry or whoever to put fueling stations in, right? Or electric charging systems or whatever. and I think right now there's a little bit of like everybody, because the government's so involved in that, nobody knows quite what's like LNG would theoretically be illegal in California in 10 years, supposedly. So there's not going to be a lot of people chomping at the bit to build LNG stations in California, which, I mean, that's probably a little bit of what Ted's getting at, is maybe that's a better choice and we should be going after that. But I think right now it's kind of an arms race for like what technology works really well. And sorry, you look like you're trying to comment.
I just, yeah, well, you got me. I just want to throw this out here while you're going. What do you think about regional technologies?
Mm-hmm.
So, because while you're talking, of course, it wouldn't be very expensive to set up natural gas fueling stations in Alberta, because we have the entire infrastructure. The entire province is blanketed with piping for natural gas, right? Now, solar sucks. I mean, no, I don't want to say it doesn't. We have a lot of sun here, but we have cold weather, right? But if you go to somewhere like Nevada or California, you may have a much quicker, easier time getting full adoption of electric vehicles because you have that, right? Hydrogen. I'm not sure exactly how the manufacture, the mining, or however that works, but if you had an area, so I'm wondering if, I don't know. And of course, everybody thinks their idea is the best, right? Because California, we have, electricity is great. Well, maybe I love natural gas. I think it's right. I'm a huge fan of it. So I wonder if there'd be, and I don't think it's going to work because we love to have things standardized, right? But if you look back to like the electric grid, for instance, you had the AC and the DC wars and eventually one won out, or, you go with VHS versus Betamax, right?
Right.
And each technology was good and each one served a purpose. But I wonder if there's room for regional variations for a while.
I think the biggest impediment to that is government, because government likes to have top-down control over their entire area. So the government of Canada and the government of the United States want to say, thus shall it be for this huge area. But I do think, that would be the natural outcome, is more regional variation, because you're not talking about something like a VHS or AC to some extent, but VHS is a good example, right? Like, there are not huge numbers of video production things out there in the world, right? Most videos are coming from the same people in the same area. And there's no a VHS, as far as I know, a VHS plays just as well as in Alberta as it does in Indiana, as it does in Florida. There's no benefit to having a bunch of varieties. Whereas, like, your building standards are significantly different than mine because you live in a different environment than I do. And no one is going to pick up a house built where you live and put it on a truck and bring it to where I live. That's silly. No one would do that. And so, same thing with vehicles. Yes, vehicles do travel a lot, but there is, if you had,
but most don't, right?
Right, most don't. And if you had LNG stations on every corner where you live, and everybody did that, and then where I live, there was one in my town, or one in one of the 3 towns near me, well, you could come visit me, and yeah, you'd have to be a little more careful. And, oh yeah, you crazy Indiana people, you don't have natural gas. Like, I have to drive, 20 minutes to the bigger town instead of 10 minutes to the little town to get fuel. But it would work. Like, and if you moved from there to here, you'd sell your LNG vehicle and you'd go to a gasoline or solar or whatever we used here. So I think that would be a natural outcome. I think the big impediment is the government's going to want to say, no, everybody has to do this.
Right. A one-size-fits-all solution, which becomes... Okay, so the next one, this was something I had in mind. I've had in mind for quite some time. So Haas says, with people not working, the great resignation, I can see this exploding and advancing in the next few years. Automation, robots, etc. So what I want to get at is, and this has been one of my thoughts, automation in general continues to eliminate, I don't want to call it a simple labor or, grunt positions, right? So all of the people, and that tends to be the majority of work as well, right? You've got a factory. So you close out a factory and you replace 1,000 jobs, 1,000 people fixing widgets with 20 people who now fix the robots that build the widgets, right?
Right.
So now you have a vast majority of those people unemployed or underemployed or whatever. I'm not,
Yeah.
So now, where do they go? Where is the economy of the future? I have opinions on this, but I'd like to hear yours before I dive into it.
All right. So I think you generally should check out John Pugliano's book, The Robots Are Coming. Did you know he wrote a book?
Yes, John's awesome. I haven't read it, but
super good book. Highly recommend it. He wrote that back in 2016 or 17. And I'll just do my best to parrot his opinion because I think it was really a good view on it. And basically, what I think is basically he says in that book is that things are going to continue the way they always have, and machines will eliminate drudgery and allow human beings to do more things that we like better. But we're in an inflection point where that's probably happening a little faster than it has at other times. And so the transition will probably kind of suck for a lot of people. And then I will add my opinion is I think the other thing we've seen historically that I think we'll continue to see is unfortunately a lot of people becoming useless. And if you look at, the number, I don't want to like rag on people on welfare or whatever, but you look at the people who are pure consumers, even people in nursing homes, right? If you're living in a nursing home, you're probably doing nothing
productive for the world.
Yes, I'm trying to say this nicely. Like
I'll say it. If you're in a nursing home, your days of productivity there's a pretty good chance they've passed, unfortunately.
Right,
and so we're all heading there. So
100 years ago, we could not afford to stick people in a nursing home to suck up resources for 10 or 20 years, and a lot of people aren't in there that long. But so grandma would have lived with you, and she would have helped babysit a little bit, and she would have helped teach your kids how to do some things, taken on some educational role. And, maybe grandpa would have sat over there and cracked nuts in the winter. And that's not real productive, but it's kind of cool and it's fun and that sort of thing. And we have just shuffled those people off into nursing homes to wait to die, basically, which I think is really crappy. But our society is wealthy enough that we can afford to have people live for a decade in a nursing home and do nothing but consume resources. And wish that their family would come visit them. And I don't think that's a great way to run a family. Like, I hope I don't end up there. My goal is to raise my kids so that we all want to be together when I'm old. But that will continue, I think. And then, people who are on disability, like Jack Spirko's been talking some lately about how, where he's from, like getting retired on disability is kind of a goal, right?
Yeah.
And that couldn't happen in a less wealthy society. Like, you couldn't afford to have that many people only consuming. And so I think, unfortunately, we will see more of that. And I think a lot of the people in charge of the world think that's inevitable and are basically trying to make a soft landing because that's inevitable. And so they
hear the words,
create more of it.
Universal basic income. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yep. That would be an example. Yep. Yeah. If you get a UBI, right, maybe another 20% of the population just sits down and plays video games and lives in the metaverse and whatever. And that, I think it's wrong to think that the people in charge want to force all of us into that world, right? I think that they...
Sorry, I had to share that. I'm not going to read it out. Well, yeah, I am. Ted McDonald says great grandma would have been smothered by a pillow. So if anybody would like to cancel anyone this evening, you can find Ted, on the right coast, not the left.
There you go. What was it? Oh, I think that a lot of times we think about that UBI and that sort of thing. We think that the people in charge of the world want every single human being to go on UBI and plug into the matrix and do nothing. And, everything be run by robots. And maybe there are some people that want that. I think it's probably more accurate that they think, because people have thought this for a long time, powerful people that are in charge of things have thought we're going to be too productive and there just won't be anything for people to do. And so we need to come up with bread and circuses to entertain them, because otherwise they'll riot because there's no work for them to do because we don't need them in the economy anymore. And I think the liberty-minded Austrian economic viewpoint to that is that human desires are limitless. And so if if nobody needs to wash clothes down by the river on a rock, maybe that means more people can start teaching music. And if we get robots that teach music, maybe that means more people can, get paid to go into nursing homes and talk to old people. Or like we can always come up with something else that we would as humanity desire and then trade amongst ourselves to get that, even if that's just like, more counseling. Like maybe we have a lot more therapists who are able to help people self-actualize more, like you were talking about. And we think, oh, that's kind of wishy-washy and leftist and whatever. But that's, having you help people figure out what they want to do with their lives, right?
Right.
Like there's a lot more people doing that today through podcasts or whatever than there were 30 years ago, partly because society's wealthier and we can do more of it with robots, right? You don't need $100,000 in a year in production staff to do this. You can do it with probably $2,000 worth of equipment. You can make a top quality broadcast where you'd had to hire 5 or 6 people 20 years ago to do this for you. And so you're doing a job that didn't exist and we're all glad that you're doing it because this is something human beings want, right?
And so, we were, you brought it up. You read my mind. I can't disagree. I want to disagree with you, Andy, but I can't, but we've as a society, whether you want to say it was cheap energy, modern technology, whatever, has got us to the pinnacle or the peak of the, pyramid of the hierarchy of needs.
Right.
To the point where Ted McDonald says folks are going to make themselves obsolete. So where I see it going, I think, because when you break down an economy is at its barest bones is value for value exchange. So if I go and see you in, way back and you have a really nice brontosaurus bone that makes really good soup stock, and I have a really good rock that would make a really good wheel, we might exchange, right? And then, of course, yes. So here's your brontosaurus bone, and thank you for that Fred Flintstone wheel, right? So then you move further and further and further along, and now we're at the point where I think, the last 2-3 years has maybe exacerbated it a little bit, sped things up, but people realized, holy shit, I really enjoy having more free time. So they invest in themselves or whatever it happens to be. And maybe I'm a little bit biased here, but I think maybe we're heading into a bit of a creative community or a creative economy, because so many people will have, number one, they don't have a job necessarily, so they need to do something with their free time. And yes, there will always be the Doritos munching, Mountain Dew guzzling, VR headset wearing, whatever, right? I get it. I like VR, but anyway, there always will be. But I think there's going to be a lot of people who, and you can go on Twitch, for instance, or video game streamers, and for whatever reason, Gen Z people love to sit down and watch other people play video games, and they get value for that. So what do? They tip them. And that's all that is a circular economy. So, if I podcast and somebody starts a business and they say, wow, Tim, that's awesome, I'm going to subscribe to your stupid little patch club or whatever it happens to be, right? And I think that with humanity having that free time and having a majority of our basic needs met, I think people are going to tend toward more creative and less tangible things that still give humans value.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that is kind of an actionable point for people on that. I think one kink in the wheel there is that a lot of the, and I don't know why this is, right? Is this intentional? Is it just the zeitgeist? I don't know. But I think we are moving towards a less productive way of doing things and more of just wasting stuff. And so you look at, I assume you've been on forums a lot, right?
Sure.
You look at forums versus Facebook. Like Facebook has basically put forums completely out of business, right? Like most forums are dead, and now all that happens on Facebook. Well, I still, to this day, when I Google stuff, I'm trying to fix some random old car that, hasn't been made in 40 years, doesn't have a bunch of followers, nobody knows about it. If I go out and I search that in whatever search engine, I'm going to prefer clicking on the forum entries, right? Because I'm hoping I find a guy from 2005 that had one of these that spent 14 hours pulling this part off, meticulously photographing it, repainting it, reassembling it, and writing out a 2-page explanation of how to do that, right? Because people used to do that and post it to the internet, and that was a rewarded behavior, and so we got a lot of it. Well, that's not what gets rewarded on Facebook.
Right.
And even when it does happen, you can't find it through a search engine, right? Like we have.
Yeah, that's weird. We've
the technology we have has crowded out that system that we used to have that put a lot of valuable information out there. Like, so, I mean, there are people who wrote those forum posts decades ago that are still helping people, right? Like that adds to humanity's knowledge. And I don't know that any Facebook post has ever had that kind of reach, right? Like, even if it goes viral and millions of people see it, nobody remembers it, nobody looks it up. It's this, down the river kind of thing. And that is absolutely a feature of the technology we're using, right? Like I don't know if it's a conscious choice, but that's a choice by the people who build Facebook for the world to work that way for whatever reason, and good, bad, indifferent, accident, I don't know. But I think one thing that we should be doing as people who care about this stuff is trying to push for that. Like, let's figure out how to make things more like where when you put out a lot of effort, it produces a useful product that will last as long as possible, as opposed to, right, let's be, building new skateboards instead of pedaling our wheels on exercise bikes, basically. And I think that's a huge problem that we have, is that we're kind of going the wrong direction on that.
Yeah. And that it goes down to Google, for instance. People, I don't know if Google has a plan. I mean, so they apparently their recent search algorithms have prioritized information over, everybody uses that same example, but you go to look for a recipe and you might find a recipe, but you need to scroll through 84 paragraphs of the lady telling you about her
the life story.
The life story of why her husband fell down when he was young, cracked his tailbone, and now really appreciates her bone broth for whatever. They're not connected at all. But what it does is it fills in keywords and it gives you a whole hell of a lot of Amazon affiliate links.
Yep.
And here comes the old man in me. But do you remember when you used to be able to type into a search engine and get results that worked?
Yeah.
YouTube does. I love YouTube for that, because if I put how to rebuild a 1978 and whatever, it's going to come up. I might have to watch a few, but it's going to be there. Whereas the stuff on search engines have been, and I don't know. Maybe we're just a bunch of old men yelling at clouds again. I'm not sure, but that it's been obfuscated so far that it's hard to find,
Right.
But then my other thought is, did Facebook draw people away from forums, or did forums run their course? And what I mean by that is, you only need one person to do a post in a forum on how to fix a 19 whatever Studebaker, right? You only need the one. So eventually, the majority of people have contributed. That information's still there, and maybe they need to do something else with their time. I don't know. What do you think?
I think there's a little bit of a balance. So on the one side, what you just said, right? Maybe this information's done and we don't need anybody to do this anymore. That's the same kind of thinking of the people that think, oh, we're going to become overproductive. We need to get people hooked on Cheetos and VR so they'll get out of the way, because there's not going to be anything to do. We won't come up with any new value for those people to produce, right? And so it's totally possible that the 1929 Studebaker forum ran its course because there's less of those cars. The people that are into them are getting old. Like, that forum might die out. But the concept of it's better for, me as a human being to develop, where instead of like pulling out my phone and scrolling along and like angry reacting to something on Facebook, it is better for me to spend my time documenting something and figure out how to do that carefully. And so what I think happened, and there's a really good book about this called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. The first half of it is great. The second half is kind of the same thing over again. That's how it seemed to me. But she talks about this, and it's this commodification of attention. And so Google and Facebook and all these companies make their money by sucking in your eyeballs. And so they don't try to encourage you to be a productive human being. They try to encourage you to stare at a screen as long as possible so they can run ads in front of you so companies can pay them.
And what's crazy about that is how, it's a cart and a horse or chicken and an egg scenario, right?
Right.
Like, you know what? And again, it's the whole algorithm rewards certain things. So,
Yep.
Who created it? It's almost like it had a mind of its own and it almost created itself. And then again, companies did what companies do, and they seen a need and they saw a way to make money and they saw a way to make more money. So they just pursued it. And this is the logical conclusion of one possible path.
Right.
Doesn't make it easy, doesn't make it right. It just is. And I guess that's when it comes down to it. Again, it's the whole amoral technology is good or bad or
And I do think like technology itself is not like, it can't be moral. It's not a thinking actor, right? But I think every technology has a natural outcome. And so we can look at technologies and say, like, what's the natural outcome of this? And do we, as a culture, whether that's the United States at large or in my house, do we want that natural outcome? I think you and I were talking about this at Self-Reliance, right? How we think open carry should be legal, but we don't really think anybody should do it. Were we talking about that?
Yeah. I think, I was there when that conversation, and there's a whole thought process behind it.
Right. So the technology of a gun has certain effects, right? If you get in a fight and everybody is armed to the teeth with firearms, it's more likely that someone's going to die than if you get in a fist fight where nobody's got a gun, right? Just because guns are really, really efficient at killing people. And so, you need to be aware of that. And so the technology of a gun moves you towards killing more so than the technology of a spoon, right? And you have to figure out a healthy way to handle that technology. And so, some people say, well, we just shouldn't have guns. Well, I think that's kind of a silly way to handle that technology because it doesn't work to just go nah, 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 and pretend it doesn't exist. But at the same time, like, I don't think that you should just like be really silly about guns. Like, I think, as parents, we should teach our kids about them, how to be responsible firearm owners. We should, train with them, like teach people that this is serious. Like, hey, you shouldn't, strap on a pistol if you're going to plan to go out to the bar and get drunk. Like, that's a poor choice. And you should have a locked box in your car that you can put it in safely and lock it up so that you don't do something stupid. Right. And so that's with that technology, you come up with a cultural way to handle it. And I think that is where we've really fallen down in the last 20 or 30 years because our culture is so government centered and government has just like completely screwed the pooch on this stuff. And we have the technology is running us down the rails. I don't want to say that it wants to because it's inanimate, right? It doesn't want anything, but the natural rails of certain technologies go this direction. And we don't have a strong, we don't have, whether it's strong religion or healthy government systems where people are actually engaged, or, there's probably lots of different things that could help that say like, no, we don't like where those rails go. We're going to angle these this way, and we're going to use more of this technology and less of that technology.
It's almost like we've done things because we can, but never really stopped to think of whether we should or not.
Right.
And the introspection's gone too, because, and part of this might just be the speed at which technology's improved over the last few decades. You end up getting, you're always busy looking for the next great thing. So instead of sitting back and saying, hey, how can we use this to the best of its ability or to the best advantage of society for the most people, we're just like, okay, let's go to the next thing. And so all we're really doing is hopping on the back of technology and going along for the ride.
Yeah. And the other thing that we're grappling with, I think, is the technology of propaganda, basically. If you read Edward Bernays, writing back in, I think, the 30s, or C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Abolition of Man, which is super good. in the 60s, and I'm reading a book right now called Technopoly from the early 90s, and they all, like, people have been thinking about that. That's by Neil Postman. They wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Amusing Ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, so Technopoly, super good. I'm in the middle of that. It's great. But all these guys are talking about basically, over the last 70 years or whatever, we've been working on basically cracking the science of humans, right? And they've done that really well. And so you have all these things like red makes you angry, so don't paint your room red and stuff like that. But you also see like that knowledge has been taken and basically weaponized or, refined to a weapons grade material to where advertising and, then that's the thing with all these social media companies is they have knowingly been developing their product to be addictive. And so that is like we as individuals don't recognize that. We just think, oh, Facebook, it'll be really handy. I can connect with my grandma. And so we get it. And then the next thing we know, we're just, sucked into it and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling.
Yeah.
And then, people say, oh, well, you're weak and you're lazy and whatever. Well, you're also dealing with, there have been literally millions of dollars spent to figure out how to keep you scrolling and scrolling and scrolling as much as possible. And, some people will say like, oh, that's why we need regulation. I'm not sure that's the case, but, what can you do in your personal life? Like get educated, like get a Facebook, I can't think of the add-on names you can give them for your browser, or like, I try to not use Facebook on my phone. I try to not use Facebook at all, but like I'll get on there and, buy stuff because unfortunately that's where you buy things nowadays instead of Craigslist. But I try to do it on a computer browser as much as I can because it's not nearly as addictive that way, whether that's the nature of the laptop or just because they spend less money trying to make it less addictive. I don't know. But that's a huge, huge feature is like humanity has really, really refined the technology of human manipulation. And there are people using that, weapons grade human manipulation on you and I all the time. And nobody's teaching us in school or homeschooling or whatever. Like that's not part of our standard, like cultural, hey, you need to have, years of training on how to handle psychological manipulation because you're going to face that every hour of every day for the rest of your life. And so we can train ourselves and we can train our kids. I think we need to, because that's a huge technology that's working against anything that the people who are using that technology aren't trying to get done, which is usually just to make themselves money or make themselves powerful or get themselves elected.
Yes, and that's what it comes down to, I want to grab another one here. This one was from One Step Closer, I think. Let's bring this one up. I don't think we're going to make it through many of them.
Yeah.
Said, I think there will be a lot of opportunity for focusing on mass customization, more small farms, 3D printers, home CNC machines, etc. And that goes part and parcel with the creative economy that I think is coming. But what do you think, Andy? Go ahead.
So again, I think there's going to be kind of a bifurcation, right? And that is like, for that to work, you need a base heavy industry, right? If you want to have lots of home 3D printers, you need really cheap, high quality plastics available, right? Which are probably going to come out of gigantic factories. For home CNC, you need, if you want to be CNCing metal, you're going to need good suppliers of high quality metal and, FedEx continuing to deliver that to your door or whatever. So I think that is probably true. I don't think we'll see where most of the goods that you use on a daily basis are manufactured in that way. I think we'll see more of, if you're super into coffee cups, you'll have lots of awesome custom coffee cups, and you'll use a super conventional table that got shipped to you from IKEA to set them on. And if you're really into woodworking, you'll have a super awesome table that you built with your home CNC rig, and you'll put IKEA coffee mugs on it, or Amazon coffee mugs or whatever. And so you'll have pockets of that. So I think as far as like a sector that people could get into, probably really good, but I don't think we'll see a world where everything's made by hand or, made in somebody's house or whatever.
I think that's what they meant. I think they meant that'll be, and maybe we can call it a hobby economy too, whereas people are spending money on their hobby. But I think that's what they mean is the people who have, that are self-actualized or whatever you want to call it, that have that time, that'll be a good area to get into to make money for that.
Yeah. And I think that's a great thing to have more. Like that's one of my goals for the next couple of years is to have more beautiful things with a story in my home, because I tend to be
Right.
super efficiency oriented, and so I got a bunch of stuff from the thrift store in my house. I'm like, I would really rather like buy a coffee mug. You know, I got a couple coffee mugs I bartered for it, a barter blanket at Nicole's a couple years ago, and I'm glad I have those. Like my coffee mugs are getting to be where they're all like every one of them has a story, and some of those stories are we bought these on vacation at this cool little thrift store, but most of them are I know the person that made this. This is from my friend's company, like that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's a cool thing to do.
That's why I buy a lot of what I buy at this. I have Patrick Roman neck knife, the
Yep.
Genesis that I wear. I'm not wearing right at the moment, but I wear it all the time.
Right.
And every time, when I have it, I think about the great conversations I've had with Patrick and how much I appreciate him as a friend and how I wanted to support him.
Yep.
Maybe even to the point where I made the point at the Self-Reliance Festival is that I will buy some things that I don't even need to support people because it has a story and a relationship behind it. Right.
Right. Yeah. And I think the big thing with that, like my personal finance side coming out, right, like is make sure that you're in a financial position to do that.
Oh, and yeah, I should have
in this, and yeah, I mean, I know you think that and you talk about that, but like in our society right now, it is much easier to become very comfortable financially than it ever has been. And I know probably people are, I'm fortunate, like there are a lot of people struggling, right? But like there are ways, there are people that will teach you to do that. You can get wealthy and then you can start, or not even, wealthy, but make yourself financially stable and comfortable and independent. And then, like that's that next level of Maslow's hierarchy is the friendships and the relationships and the beauty and all that.
Let's grab two more, and then I want to before we we've almost been 2 hours. I don't know if you noticed it. This great. This is what happens when Andy and I talk. But at the end here, I want us to make a couple of predictions. But we'll grab two more tonight, guys, and we'll have Andy back on in the new year. When in 3 or 4 more months down the road, or whenever you're available, if you want to, because we just seem to have fun with it. So this one's a pet one of mine. So let's talk about this. Key to the 21st century will be affordable energy storage. Top-notch battery tech with will be the new $1 trillion industry. What do you think?
If we can figure it out, I agree. I mean, this comes back to this like physical world versus information world thing, I think, right? This is a physical chemistry problem. And there's a lot of money being spent on this right now. And they're trying to figure it out, and it's getting better. But a lot of the problems that we have need such tremendous improvements that, and the Star Trek side of me says, of course we'll have this someday. The other side of me says, well, I don't want to assume this is going to happen any minute. And you look at, I remember several years ago, I had a boss that was super worried that our company was going to go out of business because, all heavy trucking was going to be all engines were going to be replaced by battery powered stuff. And so I sat down and did the math on how much batteries would have to improve to replace a tank of diesel. And at that time it was like 20 times or something, like they would have to be like 20 times more efficient, and they'd still have to charge super fast to be as convenient as a tank of diesel, right? And so I agree this is a huge thing that lots of money's going into, and if people can figure this out, it'll be huge. And we are, right? Batteries today, your dewalt lithium ion batteries are dozens. I have a guy that's been helping me out with some stuff around our homestead, and I asked him to put in some, it was like 100 electric insulators for electric fence. And so he needed to drill like take a drill bit and run it in to the fence post, right? And I said, well, I'll leave you out a battery powered drill for that. And he's kind of old fashioned, right? He's not got any battery tools. And he said, well, will you have a charger out and a bunch of extra batteries? And I was like, no. I was like,
you're good.
You won't need more than one battery. You could do like 5 times this much work with one battery. He's like, really? He's like, I haven't had a battery operated tool in like 20 years. And I said, yeah.
He's missing out.
Right. But I think we are seeing huge improvements. I think we'll hit a little bit of a tipping point where things like over the road trucking are going to still need a 10x improvement over what we've got now, which maybe we'll see that in 10 or 20 years. Maybe we won't. I think we'll spend a lot of money trying to get there, but we'll see.
That's okay. So that was kind of one of my areas of maybe looking into the future anyhow, but let's talk about it for a second, because traditional, power storage batteries tend to be fairly heavy, and we've seen incremental improvements. But in order to get the improvement we need, it doesn't look like we're going to get the incremental improvement fast enough. But just because I can't see it doesn't mean it's not going to happen, right? So do you see battery technology improving incrementally over the next 20 years, or do you see a game changer coming out of left field? Because every week there's a new CNN story, the new battery, but I remember one day watching some video on stored energy, and they talked about where they would, and it was a battery, but it wasn't. They would take water and pump it up the hill or whatever, and then I think it was barrels or whatever it is. Anyway, you have that energy stored there, and then you could release it at a time. So it was like a massive water storage battery that didn't require lead acid storage. And it's probably not going to be the way, but what do you think? Do you think we're just going to keep improving, or do you think they're going to find something?
So, yes.
I figured that was the answer.
Yeah. All technology improves incrementally until you get a black swan event that changes everything, right? That's the whole black swan idea. Nassim Taleb's stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
I know the term, but I don't know where it came from.
Okay, so the idea of a black swan, where the term actually comes from is swans, and I'm going to totally butcher this, but basically swans, there is genetic probability for there to be a completely black swan, but it's really, really improbable. So like 1 in 100,000 or something, right? So you can say with confidence there probably is a black swan out there in the world today, but the odds of finding one are basically zero, right? Like you can go swan hunting all over and you're probably never going to see a black swan because they're so uncommon. But it's a deterministic process that creates those, right? It's genetically like guaranteed they'll come along every so often. So like Nassim Taleb's whole thing is we know that unexpected things happen, but by definition, we don't know what an unexpected thing is, or it wouldn't be unexpected, right? And so with technology, like the odds that in the next 50 years, someone will invent some technology you and I have never even thought of that will totally revolutionize things are probably practically 100%, right?
Yeah.
But if it's something we've never thought of, we're not going to be able to say, oh yeah, I'm sure that this will get invented, right? And so like the smartphone's a good example of that, right? Like nobody was out there asking for tiny handheld computers with little screens 20 years ago. And Steve Jobs came up with this, and he was able to package the iPhone, and there were other attempts and it wasn't great, but the iPhone was a black swan event. And like 3 years after that, half the population of the United States had a smartphone. Right. And that was, if you'd asked tech people in 2002 what they thought computers would look like in 2022, it would not be this, right? This is not what
Newton and things like that.
Yeah. And so there's a quote, I think I've heard Jack Spirko say this, that like supposedly I think it was Henry Ford said if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses.
Yeah.
And so I think there's an element of that, like, is it possible that somebody will invent some energy-based storage system that uses force fields and whatever and is 1,000 times more efficient than a battery, and we'll be using that 10 years from now? Absolutely. Like that could happen. And there's no way to predict that or know what it might look like, but it also might not happen. And that black swan might be smaller computers or more gasoline, finding more oil in the ground, or, better oil processing to where there's less CO2 and they stop caring about that or whatever. The other thing I do think is interesting about batteries is, I know you're a sci-fi guy, right?
Oh yeah.
You look at sci-fi stuff and you start thinking about the energy density of something. To have batteries the way we would want, they would have to be so incredibly safe. Like think about the lightsabers from Star Wars, right? So I'm a Star Wars nerd, right? The idea was they did not recharge those lightsabers, right? In the Star Wars storyline, a Jedi builds his lightsaber, and there you go, human soul stored in mason jars. I mean, nobody's tried it. Maybe it'll work. The Jedi builds his lightsaber, he puts the power cell in, and then he carries that for the rest of his life unless there's some catastrophe, right? Well, you start thinking about that. Okay, you know how much energy it takes to melt steel, like they do in some of those movies where they're like cutting through 2-foot thick doors? Like that little power cell that would be this big would have terawatts upon terawatts of energy, to where if that ruptured, it would like vaporize a block, right?
It would have to be a mini nuclear reactor.
Right. It's like a micro nuclear reactor, and they're just like swinging those on their belts and like throwing them around in the snow and whatever. Like the safety factor you would have to have for that kind of energy storage is inconceivable. Nothing we have is that reliable, right? It's like, you need to have this car. It's going to be great, but you cannot, like, you're going to get in the car and you're going to drive 7 million miles without ever changing the oil. It needs to be that reliable.
Right.
And
it needs to be more reliable than modern aviation. And that is really, really reliable.
Right. And that's where I do think there's maybe kind of a physics limit on batteries, is if you want to get to that super duper state, like there's going to be so much energy contained there. And that is, gasoline has that much energy too. And we drive around with tanks full of that all the time. But you got it, like electrical energy is pretty dangerous right now. And we're going to have to really make some improvements to where we, if you're driving an electric car and you get T-boned, it doesn't like vaporize a bunch of stuff when it blows up, right? And gasoline is more or less that safe. So we need to figure out a way to store energy that safely. And gasoline's not even that safe, but it doesn't explode in a giant ball of fire every time you have a wreck.
Right. I can't remember if it was Fred or if it was PA Prepper Josh Sloan, but one of them shared an article a couple of years ago about atomic batteries. And I got really excited. And I thought, oh man, this sounds incredible. Because they said basically it'll be like a button-sized battery that will last forever. And what they were doing was they were taking expended nuclear waste in a very, very, very tiny form, so you could never do anything with it.
Yeah.
And they were going to use it as a battery that would last infinitely. Not infinitely, but, life,
decades.
Right? Which was cool. But I get digging into it, and basically the technology is good for things like scales, like kitchen scales, that kind of stuff. Right? And how little power does that little tiny LCD screen take? Almost nothing, right? Which is cool. So that will replace those 2032
2016 all those. Yeah.
Now, can you scale that up someday? Maybe. I don't know. They didn't seem to think it was ever going to be that, but I don't know. It's So, okay, two things. Technology is always heading forward. And, there's always the story of the week, whether it's, a cure for cancer or whatever. So 2 stories. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have been convinced that Amazon would be delivering all their packages by drones today. Because when Jeff Bezos made that unveiling of, it was 2014. So we're almost 10 years ago. I remember watching the video. No, sorry, 2013. I was still out east. And I thought, for sure, this is going to solve that last mile dilemma. But we're not. Here we are 10 years later, and we're no closer to that than the day they came out with it. Maybe even further away in some instances. Now, the other one, the Great Pacific Plastic Patch, or whatever you want to call it. Do you remember when they first started talking about that? It was probably about 10 years ago, right? And today, that's not going to, I don't want to say it's not going to be an issue, but the amount of plastic they're pulling out of the oceans based off of, what was it? The original was a teenager science project or something. I can't remember where it all went, but they're pulling the plastics out of the ocean.
That's cool.
So you have 2 things over 10 years that both looked, actually, to be honest, if you'd asked me, I would have probably guessed drone delivery would have had a higher probability than cleaning up the Great Barrier Plastic Reef or whatever, And it's hard to predict, but that's my segue into make a prediction or two over the next 10 years of, you make a wild one and make a safe one.
All right. Oh, man. So I think the safe prediction is, I think we will see digital assistants be way, way more powerful than they are today. And I hope that we end up with stuff that is more under the user control, because right now we're basically phoning home to either Google or Apple whenever you use one of those,
Right.
which I don't, so I'm not even really in tune with how they work. But that's all completely centrally controlled, and it's all data collection and stuff. And I hope that gets more decentralized. And I hope 10 years from now, you're running a Raspberry Pi with an open source version of Alexa, solving all your problems. But I think that our computers are too complicated for us to manage, and we need digital assistants. So one way I think that this could work is you have a machine learning algorithm that basically it's designed to interact with you, right? So it's like a person. You choose a voice and probably an avatar and whatever, and then it's like, "Hi Tim, welcome to your new phone. I'm going to read all your privacy policies for you. Tell me a little bit about yourself." And then you have a conversation with it, and like basically set up a profile with probably not a huge amount of like button clicking on your part, more of a conversation. And then it will just like look at privacy policies of things. So like you want to go and get an app, and right now you just, pick one that has good reviews, and you click on it, and it's like, here's a 27-page privacy policy. And you're like, I don't have time to read that. And you just accept it. Right. So I think in the future, you'll say, "Hey Siri, fetch me an app that does such and so." And it'll come back and it'll say, "Well, I found this one. It's got good reviews, but I don't think you would like the privacy policy. Do you really need this feature?" And you'll say, "No, I don't." And I'll say, "Okay, well, in that case, I recommend this one, which has a much better privacy policy, because I know you care about that, Tim. And I think it'll do everything you want. How about I download it and install it for you?" And so whether or not it's quite that friendly space age Jetson talk to you thing or not, I think we'll see digital assistants do a lot more for us, or
Yes,
a lot more to us, at least, hopefully for us and not for our googly overlords. So
I can see that. Yeah,
that's my, I think, pretty safe prediction.
I think you're right, because we're not that far from it. When
Right.
I'm driving, I only in the last year or so have I really gotten into voice activation and using Siri for searching and things. And she still comes up against things sometimes. Like if I want to know a distance between two places, usually she'll find it. But if I ask, like, for instance, when I was driving, I want, like, find me the Walmart in North Dakota closest to the I-29. She'd be like, "Well,
Right.
here's the choices I found." Well, pretty soon she's going to be able to pick that, right? So, yeah.
Right.
But yeah, go ahead. So, what is your off the wall crazy?
Off the wall. Gosh, I think that farming being way decentralized would probably be my I think we're probably going to head in that direction, but I think that's a really uphill battle, and I have trouble seeing that. 50 years from now, I think it'll probably be that way. But as far as a short term, 10 years from now, farmers having hundreds of little robots running around doing their bidding, I feel like that'd be a stretch. So I'll go with that for my my off the wall in the short term prediction. How about you?
I'm going to go with, okay, I don't know if this one's that crazy or not, but I think my simple one is, I think within 10 years, you're going to be having people living the majority of their life in a virtual world. I don't know how many, and I don't say the entire world will be, but I think that there will be. I reminded of Back to the Future too. When the kids are sitting at the table and they have the VR headsets on and they're doing their thing. I think there'll be people, that'll be the logical conclusion, or the most logical thing to come out of having too much time on their hands. Some of us will turn to creativity, and other people will turn to a Westworld style existence, where they decide, I'm just going to retreat to a virtual world. And I don't necessarily think they'll be literally plugged into the Matrix, but I think other than eating, sleeping, and using the bathroom, their entire life will be within a virtual existence. I don't know if it'll be everybody, but the technology is already there that somebody could do it if they wanted.
Right. I mean, I think you could say, I think that's when we were deceived by sci-fi, because I think people are already doing that. I remember I had a guy I worked with several years ago, and at that point I was riding my bike to work every day. I lived in town, and he came in one day and he was complaining because it had been like -10 out that morning. That's Fahrenheit.
Right.
And he got real cold because he came out of his house, out of his heated house, into his attached garage, into his car that he starts remotely, gets in his car, drives to work, parks as close as possible to the door, and then runs in the couple hundred feet to get to the door in the heated building. And so he was cold because he didn't realize he needed to wear a real coat instead of a little jacket because it was -10. And he was just, like he has no connection to the physical, and he was bitching to me about this, and I was like, yeah, man, I rode my bike to work this morning before the sun came up, and he's like, oh. But he had zero connection to his physical environment, because when he got off that day, the exact same thing in reverse. He spent probably less than 5 minutes in natural light, natural wind, natural, outside.
Right.
And he's he was not an all on the computer guy. So if you do computer programming and you talk to all your friends on Telegram and you do video gaming, like I think in some sense people already live completely virtually. Some people
see that. Sure.
So yeah, I think that's a good safe prediction.
Now my off the wall one, and I think personally it's possible, maybe not probable, but possible. But I think within 10 years, the majority of vehicles on the road are going to be self-driving or have self-driving capabilities, to the point where I think some kids may never need to get a license at that point. But that's a moot point. But I think standard, most vehicles or the majority of vehicles within 10 years will have self-driving capabilities. And maybe that's not as crazy, but man, whenever I bring that up, don't people holler? They, no, I'll never give up my standard or whatever,
Right.
What do you think?
Yep.
You think I'm off? Because I think we had this discussion in Telegram one day.
I think we did. Yeah. I think the only way that can work is with probably legal changes, because we're not that far from being able to do that on the interstate. And I've thought for a long time that it's very possible we'll see a point where old cars get banned from the interstate, where they just say anything built before 2025, unless it's been, completely upfitted with these technologies, can't go on the interstate because it's all completely self-driving. They all network and they run automated on the interstate at 95 miles an hour, self-spacing, blah, blah, blah. Doing that in town is orders of magnitude harder.
Yes.
And orders of magnitude higher risk.
The last mile thing again, right?
Right. Well, and it's not exactly the last mile because there's a tremendous amount of people just driving around in town. So I think the idea of cars being totally autonomous on the interstate, and then you have to drive them, or maybe it's just an interlock, right, where you have to hold on to something, or keep your hand pressed down on something for it to keep going, and if it detects you're not watching the road, it something like that, at least in town. And maybe that lets sorry, go ahead.
See where people, I don't know, I'm going to go further with it, because I think people, I think there's a cultural, a governmental, a legislative, I think there's a push for people. I think everything's coming together for a push to pull people away from the wheel. I think people want to be able to turn their back and work on work on office work while they're driving, because our attention's already completely divided. People are always doing this while you're driving anyway. So why not eliminate that altogether? There'll be cars maybe that won't even have steering wheels. And the reason I think that too is we go back to the collection of data and how we're speeding that up, right?
Right.
And of course, interstate driving, like you said, is infinitely easier for computers. But, I watched videos, I know these are Teslas, of course, of semi-autonomous driving through the city of Saskatoon already, which is not really a city, but it's, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And it was fairly successful. Things like shadows and different things were tricky. Lights were a bit tricky. But if they're that close already, think about what 10 years of what order of magnitude improvements will do. I don't know. I guess maybe I love it because when we went to the States and I rented a car and we had the adaptive braking or whatever, where it
Yeah.
would, that to
Yep.
me, lane keep and adaptive braking has solved 80% of the fatigue you get from driving already.
Right. And maybe, so there's another book recommendation for you, Strong Towns, and that's a whole organization, and they have this concept they talk about called stroads, and so like street and road, and so they're
I've seen that.
Okay, yeah, so he was on TSP, the Strong Towns guy was a few weeks ago.
Really?
Did an interview with Jack, but so they talk about how the purpose of a road is to get you from point A to point B as quickly as possible, and so interstates are the perfect example of a road. And the purpose of a street is to create wealth by being a place that people want to be. And those are antithetical goals, right? A place that you create wealth that people want to hang out and enjoy is terrible for moving you quickly,
right?
And vice versa. And so their argument is that in North America, we've tried to mush the two together and we get stroads where you go 30 or 40 miles an hour, which is not all that fast, but also it's fast enough that nobody wants to be there. And so it's like the worst of both worlds. So they campaign a lot for splitting those back up and let's get rid of all these 4-lane roads with, Taco Bells and McDonald's on them through the middle of town where people drive 35 miles an hour with lots of stoplights, which is a horrible environment for everything, but really hard problem to solve. Automated driving, hard problem for people, and that's why we run pedestrians over and stuff. And let's go to streets that are maybe 10 or 15 miles an hour. They're not very pleasant to drive on because you're going slow and there's people walking and stuff, but it's slow enough that you can do that safely. And then let's go to roads that are 50, 60 miles an hour and you don't stop, right? There's not turnoffs every 50 feet or whatever. So in that, if we did move that direction, then that would dramatically simplify the driving environment and lower the risk for automated driving. So maybe so. You might just talk me into it, Tim.
I don't know. It's somewhere in between, and I like the idea of streets too. They I'm sure I've watched some of their videos because they engineer the streets.
Mm-hmm.
They put curves and things in it so that you don't feel like you're going slow, but you physically have to slow down and you're not mad about it. It's like the old adage. I think it was the Atlanta airport. When they built a new airport, it was so efficient that people were getting off and they were waiting for their luggage because they would come off the airplane and they'd be right at the luggage carousel.
Right.
So the biggest complaints were constantly, I have to wait for my luggage. So what did they do? They moved the luggage carousels to the other end of the airport. So people get off the plane, have to walk. Complaints go to zero.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. So I don't know. Well, let's wrap up. We're 2 hours and 50. I can't believe we went this long. Sorry, guys. We'll probably split this into two episodes for the podcast crowd, just because that's usually what I do when we go over 2 hours. But how do people find you, Andy?
Telegram is probably the best place to get a hold of me. I'm in the workshop Telegram chat. Try to get in there and talk to people a few times. I'm kind of on MeWe, but not really. I've got an old website I don't update very often, but if you think I don't know, say interesting things, I have some maybe interesting articles there. I think you've got that linked. It's peopleforprivacy.com.
Yep. I got it's all in the thing there for you. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't do a lot of content creation or anything like that. I just come on occasionally and talk to people I like. So
Andy is a gem in the community, though. It takes all types to make things. It's almost like people want to apologize for not being a content creator. Well, we're all a community, and I mean, when I have a tech question, who do I turn to? I come to you. You know what I mean? Or somebody sends me a mechanic question. Well, I call my brother-in-law. And my brother-in-law doesn't make content, but he can tell me how to solve a mechanical issue, and then I can share it with whomever else is out there, and that's what I like about it. But yeah, and I consider Andy a friend, and I always love having you come on, man. It's always fun.
Thanks, Tim. No problem. Kind of you to say that.
Yeah,
I'm glad to be here.
And we'll. There's very few people that I basically book their next appointment, the next time on here, but we have a lot of fun. So if you're gaming, either late winter, early spring, we'll bring you back on and we'll do this again.
Sounds good.
Perfect. If you want to hang in the background for just a second, I'll close up and Thanks, Andy. Well, there you go, guys. We went, man, we were pushing 2.5 hours tonight. I want to apologize, but I'm not going to, because it was just that damn good. So thanks for hanging out with us. We had a great crowd in here all night with a ton of interaction. I appreciate it, guys. And, you know, I'm not, I'm not blowing smoke when I say that I really do appreciate Andy. It's people like that that make a community, because we all come at things with a different mindset, a different skill set. And what I love about Andy is he is not afraid to poke the bear a little bit once in a while. So he'll drop into the workshop group, and if he doesn't agree with something, he doesn't just go along. He doesn't toe the party line. He gets in there and he says, hey, I don't think this is right, and this is why I don't think it's right. And I appreciate that, because in any community, we can be an echo chamber, and it's nice to have people who are willing to stretch you a little bit and make you think, because that's when we really learn, is when we're uncomfortable. So I appreciate Andy coming on. And guys, thanks for dropping in. Thanks for sticking with us and listening. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.